Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to plenary session 3. My name is Ilesh Jani. I am from Mozambique, where I work at the National Institute of Health, and I'm going to be the chair of this session. We're going to have 3 presentations. We will have first a keynote address, then we will have a debate on equity, and finally, we will have the presentation of the Scientific Leadership Prize. So we now going to move on to our first presentation, the keynote address. The keynote address is going to be given by Dr. Leonardo Simão. Dr. Leonardo Simão is a medical doctor from Mozambique with a long career in health, science, and diplomacy. He has been the Minister of Health and Minister of Foreign Affairs in Mozambique. Currently, Dr. Simão is the High Representative of EDCTP for Africa and continues to actively work in the fields of health, science, and diplomacy. So we couldn't have anyone better to give us this keynote address on science and diplomacy. Dr. Simão, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ilesh. It's a pleasure for me to participate in this session and to tackle one issue which is not current in our discussion. Therefore, so dear colleagues and friends, ladies and gentlemen, the practice of science diplomacy is not new. It has been exercised throughout the human history, when, for example, scientists of those days would send emissaries to deliver scientific documents to their peers, quite often in distant places or countries. By doing so, scientists of different countries were approaching their regions or countries together through the friendly exchange of knowledge. However, the term science diplomacy only recently was developed in the aftermath of the Cold War, when the need to foster better quality cooperation and partnerships among nations was being promoted. It was then widely understood that at the end of the Cold War would free and made available important human, financial, and technological resources employed for that East-West confrontation to solve other global challenges, especially the thorny challenge of poverty, with a particular emphasis in Africa. In that expected new political atmosphere, science was to play a major role. Because the term is relatively new, there is no agreed definition of science diplomacy. However, the common understanding is that it implies the interface of the scientific, technological, and innovation system on one hand, and international relations and diplomacy on the other. The exponential development of science and the growing complexity of the external relations has led the scientists to be organized in professional societies and unions, including science academies. Scientists are employed by universities, research institutions, the pharmaceutical industry, government institutions, and the others. Typically, the career of a scientist starts after completion of the PhD degree, moving up from one postdoctoral position to the next until they reach the post of principal investigator, where, in addition to lead the research teams, they have the added responsibility of sourcing new funds from national or international competitive sources. Through scientific publishing, scientists gain visibility, build a reputation, and impact as their work is read and cited by other researchers. International scientific organizations include the Inter-Academy Partnership, ICP, with a membership of over 140 academies of science and medicine. The International Science Council, which has the mandate to convene the scientific and technological community major group, has been invited to bring in its scientific contributions to many United Nations deliberations, such as the Sustainable Development Goals. Other international organizations include the Global Young Academy and the World Academy of Sciences. In the African continent, scientific societies include the African Academy of Sciences, the Network of African Science Academies, and Sub-Saharan African regional partners. However, at national level, research professional associations are scarce, with the researchers and scientists usually integrated in the broad public health associations. Having said that, let me now turn to diplomacy. Like science diplomacy, the term diplomacy can also be defined in several ways, but its most common understanding is that of a method or a set of methods of influencing the decisions and behavior of foreign governments, international organizations, and the peoples through dialogue, negotiation, and other measures, but excluding war or violence. In other words, diplomacy is the use of dialogue, negotiations, and representations in international relations. However, even the promotion of good, harmonious, and friendly relations between countries without any negotiations involved falls in the practice of diplomacy, which is governed by the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, a 1961 treaty establishing the set of rules and norms to be followed in relations between countries or with international organizations. Due to increasing complexity in the fields of science, there is growing specialization in diplomacy. So today, we'll talk about science diplomacy, health diplomacy, climate diplomacy, cyber diplomacy, water diplomacy, etc., all reflecting the challenge of the practitioners of diplomacy to master their fields, an important condition towards fruitful and successful dialogue and negotiations. Broadly speaking, diplomacy is not only exercised by professional diplomats, but also by all those who, in a way or another, are involved in relations with other countries, foreign or international organizations. Therefore, there are several levels and categories of diplomatic activity, ranging from the simple projection of a good image of a country to complex and time-consuming negotiations of international agreements or treaties. In this constellation of diplomatic activity, one of the major and common challenges scientists are faced with is how to convince both national and international decision makers to accept and transform into policies the recommendations emanating from their research. In other words, how to influence their decision making. Through the global and regional scientific societies I have alluded to above, scientists come together, discuss issues of common or world interest, in addition to present the products of their research aimed at influencing decisions of international and regional organizations and national governments. This is a permanent challenge, which explains the need and development of science diplomacy, sometimes carried out by those who have to bridge between scientists and decision makers. The United Nations and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development have assisted national governments to establish their research and development systems and institutions, adopt a common language about science and technology policy, including forms of research, research areas, division of professional sectors, research and innovation indicators, among other relevant matters. In addition to the international scientific organizations, the global science system comprises a rich network of actors, including national governments and the research councils involved in funding research and innovation, academic as well as academic institutions, private companies, SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, NGOs, foundations, among other players. Due to the impact of globalization in science, technology, and innovation, there is today an increasing exchange of knowledge, resources, and talent as well. This has led to the emergence of new scientific powers like China, Brazil, India, and the others, as well as the emergence of scientific nations in the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and North Africa, thus developing an increasingly multipolar scientific world. A growing number of countries do have a better understanding of the value of science, technology, and digitization as soft power tools relevant in building a good image and influence of their countries. In addition to the role of these fields of human activity in the overall national development. Today, individual scientists move more easily between national borders, seeking to work with the best of their peers and to gain access to complementary resources, equipment, and knowledge. It is true that talent circulation may lead to brain drain, but it is equally true that good policies can encourage these scientists to keep engaged with their national systems, with the benefits in terms of knowledge exchange and new opportunities for institutional development. This will be a win-win situation. As I said before, some countries are making visible progress towards becoming scientific nations, but sub-Saharan Africa is still lagging behind. However, EDCTP has been playing a major role in the process of transformation of the African nations into relevant scientific players through the training of its scientists, equipment of laboratories, development of ethics committees, and establishment of appropriate regulatory framework. The regular realization of fora, like the current one, is a major contribution in science development of the continent. Furthermore, by encouraging the African governments to invest more in science, technology, and innovation, the EDCTP and the other like-minded partners, such as Africa CDC, the African Union Development Agency, NEPAD, WHO, AFRO, and the others, we can see progress in the making. Africa has the challenge to develop its science diplomacy in order to be better prepared to mobilize more the much needed resources to increase its capabilities to successfully confront the double burden posed by infectious diseases and the growing incidence of chronic diseases such as cardiovascular diseases, diabetes, and cancers. Traffic accidents are also another serious public health problem the continent is confronted with. These threats to national development of Africa, of the African countries, cannot be successfully addressed without the use of new and advanced tools that only science, technology, and innovation can create. And to reach this goal, science diplomacy has an important role to play. In the global managing of the pandemic COVID-19, the experience is showing that more often than not, Africa is on the losing side in the distribution of supplies, including vaccines, in spite of all declarations about solidarity and fairness. In my view, to change this state of affairs requires a more robust and innovative African science diplomacy. Indeed, in each field of knowledge, be it in health, education, climate, water, economy, among others, Africa needs to develop further its specialized knowledge-based diplomatic skills as to be able to negotiate better deals in international settings. And as I've just said, attract more resources to the continent, in particularly the training of its scientists. In developing the African, it is vital to make sure girls and female scientists are not left behind. Before I conclude, let me thank the Forum Scientific Committee for challenging me to take up this subject and for giving me the space to share with you these remarks. I thank you very much for kind attention, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Simão. So the session is now open for questions. Please feel free to either raise your hand and pose your question in voice, or to pose your question on the chat. So Dr. Simão, while we wait for participants to organize their thoughts, what do you think will be our biggest challenges in science diplomacy in the coming decade as we walk out of this pandemic?
I think the most challenging task ahead is to bring more equity in science. You will see a north-south divide, so fairness is not there. But also, as we discussed in another panel, female scientists are very scarce. And this can be changed. And the African science diplomacy has that responsibility of paving the way for this change to take place. And I think that is doable. What we need is a medium to long-term perspective, and also to have a strategy on how to achieve that.
So we have a question from Richard Adegbola, Dr. Simão, and his question is, are the African scientists trained and prepared to take on science diplomacy?
Well, I don't think, in general, they are not, because they focus on science and the production of scientific knowledge. So, but we have to change this state of affairs. Particularly more senior scientists who run institutions, they have to acquire some diplomatic skills, because they are the one going around, participating in meetings and so forth, and they have this opportunity to influence decisions of other countries or international organizations. So they can have some skills on that. In some countries also, there are scientists join the political establishment, like a parliament and the others. So they acquire also political skills, but so they learn more of the art of negotiating, because this is about negotiation and compromise, and also persuading others about your position. So I think we have to do more on that. As I said during the presentation, this is a new field, but which needs to be developed.
Thank you, Dr. Simão. So can we African scientists do more in terms of diplomacy within Africa? Because when we many times talk about diplomacy, we by instinct think about diplomacy with countries or regions outside our continent. Is there room for improvement in diplomacy between African countries?
Yes, I think so, and this is happening. When countries come together within, for instance, SADC or ECOWAS or other international, or the African Union, and discuss agreements about health, what they're doing actually is it's a health diplomacy. It's part of it. But they can go further, particularly in strengthening the relations between countries in the same region. And this should not be restricted only to have agreements. You can have exchange of students, of scientists, and so forth. EDCTP is doing a lot along this line. If you look at the networks of excellence, these platforms are bringing scientists together. but they are learning on how to deal with their peers of different countries, of different cultures, and they have to negotiate among them on the way forward. The projects they adopt are the product of negotiation taking place among them. So this is happening, already, but it can be stepped up.
Okay, one last question, Dr. Simão, for Michael Makanda. What advice do you have for African research leaders to stimulate local research financing through science diplomacy?
This should be and will continue to be a constant challenge to convince political leaders that to invest in science is a good investment for development. So, and sometimes the finances of the countries are dominated by economists. They just look at the spreadsheets of numbers without understanding what the health or health sector or healthier population can bring to the table. And this is a challenge we have to produce more evidence, convincing the economists that investment in health is a good investment. So, and this is doable. We see more and more economists in the area of health. This was rare because the health sector was left for health professionals alone. But more and more economists now are coming to the field, and there is an evolution of understanding or to what health can bring in terms of national development, and this will help a lot to convince leaders that, well, this is the way to go.
Thank you very much, Dr. Simão. This was a very stimulating presentation. So I thank you for your presentation and for this very lively discussion.